Hello, everyone. This is Alyssa Klein, VRS Transition and Pre-Employment Transition Specialist. Welcome to this series of training for VRS staff on pre-employment transition services. This is the first module in a series of 5 that were recorded for VRS staff in February of 2021. The audience for these modules are counselors, VR technicians, placement staff, and RAMs. Please note that we have a separate but similar series of training for Pre-ETS representatives that walks them through what they need to know in serving potentially eligible students. The remaining modules include Pre-ETS time charging, the process for serving students, purchasing Pre-ETS services, and Pre-ETS work experiences. After viewing all 5 of the modules, we ask that you complete an evaluation. There will be a link in the final module to that evaluation, and you can also receive CRC credits after you submit that evaluation as well. Here is the agenda for this module. We will review what are pre-employment transition services. We'll review the definition of a student with a disability for Pre-ETS purposes. We'll dig into the 5 required pre-employment transition services, as well as to review the 3 other Pre-ETS categories. So let's get into it. Let's talk about what are pre-employment transition services. This slide reviews the purpose of Pre-ETS. Remember that they're meant to be a component of the broader the broader transition services that we would offer to students with disabilities, and that they're meant to be an early start to career exploration. And WIOA, our federal law, calls out 2 populations that can be served through Pre-ETS services: students who are potentially eligible for the VR program, as well as students who are eligible. So for potentially eligible students, there can be 2 results from receiving Pre-ETS. Number 1, they may not need our intensive VR program because they get all they need to be prepared for life after high school and can independently move forward with their plans. And 2, for those that do need the intensive VR services, they get to start with services early, they're more well informed about career planning, and they're more ready for our intensive VR program. So for those eligible for VR services, Pre-ETS are the primary service that we provide to high school students and are key to help them being ready for what happens after graduation, particularly post-secondary education and employment. Here's a picture of how the Federal Rehabilitation Services Administration, or RSA, views how the journey for students would go. First, at the bottom of the arrow, we have Pre-ETS for students who are both potentially eligible and eligible. And then from there, students that are eligible for VR services would receive more of those intensive services, and then from there enter into competitive integrated employment. So it's seen as more of a linear journey from the federal level. But we put this slide together to maybe have a little more realistic picture of how it often will work for students who are eligible for VR services. So at times they may be receiving Pre-ETS, at times other VR services, and at other times they may be receiving both Pre-ETS and other VR services at the same time. So it's not always that linear, but of course, still the goal is competitive integrated employment. And of course, these are the 5 required pre-employment transition services: job exploration counseling, work-based learning experiences, counseling on opportunities for enrollment in post-secondary education programs, which we also call post-secondary education counseling, workplace readiness training, and instruction in self-advocacy. The WIOA, our federal law, requires that 15% of our funding that we get from the federal government be spent on pre-employment transition services annually. So in Minnesota, that equates to about $6.8 million a year. And if you want to see where we're at with our spending for this year, I have linked on here a SharePoint page where we track that. So I recommend that you look at that, and it's kind of interesting to follow that regularly just to see how we're progressing. WIOA requires that VRS collaborate with local school districts and charter schools to provide or arrange for the provision of Pre-ETS for all students in need of those services. This means that these services need to be made available statewide, regardless of whether a student has applied or been determined eligible for our general VR program. And any student with a disability is considered to be potentially eligible for Pre-ETS. And of course, we'll be talking a little bit more about the definition of a student with a disability in a bit. We learned that it is important to clarify the term required when we speak of Pre-ETS. We are only required to have Pre-ETS available statewide to those that need them. So we're not required to provide them to every student with a disability. And of course, Pre-ETS must be provided solely on a student's needs and their desires for receiving those Pre-ETS services. Furthermore, none of the provisions in WIOA mandate that all 5 Pre-ETS services be provided to each student if all the activities or services are not needed or wanted. There is also no requirement that any one type of Pre-ETS precede another, nor that a person receive a prescribed number of Pre-ETS. It's also important to remember that Pre-ETS are about exploration and not about assessment. Synonyms commonly used for the word exploration are search. So in other words, a student is figuring out where they want to go, inquiry, journey, and adventure. So it's an experience or trip per se for a student where they find out about themselves and the world or environment they live in. On the flip side, with assessment, synonyms include evaluation and recommendations, or you also see estimation, appraisal, or analysis. With such words and synonyms, you get the image of a third party or a person coming in to conduct an evaluation against a certain standard or expectation, or an expert coming in to provide recommendations regarding the situation or scenario and what you should do next. So Pre-ETS exploration experiences are more self-discovery based, student-driven, and person-centered in nature. It is when the student is given the opportunity to understand their own interests, gain basic work-related skills, and speak to what they liked and what they disliked and learned about the experience. With these experiences, the student has a chance to self-reflect, gain some insight over time to determine their next steps, and what they want to do with what they have learned. A crucial aspect of Pre-ETS is the partnership with schools, since students can receive Pre-ETS through VRS or their educational program. So it's very important to understand what schools already provide related to Pre-ETS so that we aren't duplicating services. By the very nature of what schools do in educating students and providing transition programming through IEPs, schools are the primary provider of Pre-ETS services. It is important for VRS staff to understand how Pre-ETS are currently provided to students so that VRS can help fill in the gaps. Here's another way to look at how this system ideally works. So the outermost circle represents all students with and without disabilities, ages 14 through 21. Our state requires that every student have a personal learning plan starting in 9th grade. And the components of a personal learning plan line up almost perfectly with pre-employment transition services. So students should be getting some level of Pre-ETS through their general education programming. Then we have the next circle, which represents all students with disabilities. So they could be in special ed, they could have a 504 plan, or they may not have either of those, but they do have some sort of documentation of a disability. So those students, again, are receiving services, or should be, through the PLP. And then if they are in special education, they have transition services outlined in their IEP. Then we get to VRS. So students with disabilities whose needs are not met by the school services alone, we would start with services to them as a potentially eligible student. So those be the 5 pre-employment transition services. And then from there, if students have more needs beyond just those 5 pre-employment transition services, we would want to see those students be able to apply for our intensive VR program. So this is how it ideally works. High schools and VRS are working together seamlessly in order to help all students successfully enter into competitive integrated employment. Let's move on to understanding the definition of a student with a disability. There are 3 parts to the definition of a student with a disability when we are talking about those who can receive pre-employment transition services. Number 1 is disability, number 2 is age, and number 3 is education program. So again, number 1 is disability. A student may be eligible for Pre-ETS if they are receiving special education from their school. In other words, they have an IEP. They can receive Pre-ETS if they have a 504 plan or otherwise have a documented disability. Number 2 is age. This visual, which we've shown before, depicts the age range for both youth and students. So Pre-ETS is for students who are between the ages of 14 through age 21. Youth is a broader definition and includes all individuals 14 through age 24. And the term youth comes into play more when we're talking about individuals who are interested in receiving a sub-minimum wage, which we need to be concerned about with our Section 511 of WIOA. So all students are youth, but not all youth are students. And bottom line is it's the students that can receive Pre-ETS, and again, age 14 to 21. Here's another note. This is a newer item that we've clarified related to age. So if a student turns age 22 during a high school or post-secondary academic year, and it will typically apply more to students in post-secondary education, they can continue to receive Pre-ETS through that academic year. So again, typical examples are students in post-secondary education programs. So an example would be if a student turns 22 in October, they can continue to receive Pre-ETS through that spring semester. However, if a student turns age 22 in the summertime, then Pre-ETS would end on their birthday. Number 3 in the definition of a student with a disability is education program. Education and programs include secondary education programs, non-traditional or alternative secondary education programs, which can include GED programs and homeschooling, post-secondary education programs, and other recognized educational programs, such as those offered through the juvenile justice system. Other recognized education programs can be a program offered through any entity that provides a recognized credential of education. A recognized credential of education the verification of an individual's qualification or competence issued by a third party with the relevant authority to issue those credentials. So a credential can be an educational certificate, a degree, certification, or a government-issued license. So some examples, again, I said earlier, like a GED program. It could be something like a program where you get, say, your certified nursing assistant or CNA. It could be a registered apprenticeship, or it could be other short-term types of programs offered through some of our community rehabilitation programs or offered through programs like the Job Corps in St. Paul. Again, they just need to yield a credential at the end. Again, we need to be sure to call out that a CRP can provide a credential through their programming, but sometimes some of their programs do not yield a credential. So you'll need to look into that before we're allowed to provide Pre-ETS to individuals in those programs. And in Minnesota, Project Search is considered in other recognized educational programs because it leads to a high school diploma. When students aged 21 and under are enrolled in a post-secondary education program, remember that they are still considered a student during the summertime and other breaks, which is nice. And then the next 4 slides reviews information on what documentation we need to have in the case in order for us to be able to provide Pre-ETS to students that are enrolled in post-secondary education. So there must be documentation that, number 1, the student graduated from secondary education. Number 2, that they've been accepted into a recognized post-secondary education institution or program. And number 3, the student needs to tell us their intention or confirm to us that they've accepted the invitation to enter the post-secondary education program. Here are possible items that you can obtain which fulfills the documentation requirements. So number 1, a copy of their high school diploma or a transcript showing that they've attained their diploma. And then number 2, we need to get a letter from the post-secondary education program that verifies that they've been accepted, or it could be a college class registration letter. So many of you are often already receiving these documents, so that shouldn't be such a big change for you to have to receive those to document that the student can receive Pre-ETS. But remember too that in circumstances where there'll be a delay, a significant delay in receiving the required documentation, that you can document the information through a case note after verifying the information from a third party. So for instance, to document that the student has a high school diploma, you could talk to somebody at the secondary school that would verify that, or you could talk to somebody at the post-secondary institution to also verify that information. And the information on this slide tells you what at a minimum needs to be in your case note to make that verification. Also, keep in mind that if a student takes a gap semester or a gap year, we can still provide Pre-ETS during that time, and the length of the gap does not matter. But the key is that we also need documentation in order to do that. So it needs to include information that the student has graduated from high school, that they've been accepted at the post-secondary education program, and that there is a seat or spot being held for them. And again, this can be in writing or in verbal confirmation that you get from the program. So let's recap everything we just discussed. All 3 of these categories must be checked in order for an individual to be able to receive pre-employment transition services. Number one, they need to have a disability. Number two, they need to be, it should say age 14 through 21. I didn't realize I didn't update the slide. So keep in mind, initially our definition of a student with a disability was grade 9 through 21. Now it's age 14 through 21. And I do get questions sometimes about 8th graders applying, particularly, of course, for our Pre-ETS for potentially eligible students. And that's fine as long as they're age 14 or older. And number 3 is that they're in an education program. So enrolled in a program where they're working on their high school diploma or GED, or in a post-secondary education program that yields a credential. And I've added on here that we need to have that proper documentation of that enrollment in order to provide Pre-ETS. Here is a quiz that you may have taken before, but we'd like to test your knowledge again to see if you recall items related to a student being an individual to receive pre-employment transition services. So I recommend that you pause the recording, answer these questions, and then once you're done, push play, and then we'll review the answers. All right, let's review the answers to these 5 questions. Letter A reads, Jeremy is 17 years old and is a junior at XYZ High School. The answer here is yes, he is a student for purposes of Pre-ETS because he is still in high school. Letter B reads, True is 18 years old, graduated from high school in June, and is enrolled to attend ABC Community College in August. The answer again is yes. As long as an individual is enrolled in an education program, they're considered to be a student on breaks and between terms. And just remember, we need to have documentation that they are actually enrolled in that program. Letter C reads, Gilbert is 22 years old and attends ABC Community College. This one is actually, it depends, because as I said, if an individual turns age 22 during the academic year, so fall or spring semester, they can continue to receive Pre-ETS through that academic year. So if Gilbert turned 22, basically September through May, yes, he could still continue to receive Pre-ETS. Letter D reads, Daniela is 19 years old and attends adult basic education GED classes. And of course, the answer here is also yes. She's working on her GED, which is a recognized credential of education. And finally, letter E reads, Ian is 20 years old and attends Metro CRP for office skills training. And that one is also, it depends. As long as that program yields a credential, then he can receive Pre-ETS. If not, then we're not able to provide Pre-ETS while he is in that program. So as a review, why do we care so much about all these particular pieces of the definition? So again, we need to spend 15% of our federal funds on Pre-ETS, and RSA is very particular in documenting how we are spending those funds. So that is number one. And again, the only people that can receive Pre-ETS are those that are defined as a student with a disability. And we need to make sure that students who are eligible for our intensive VR services, that we're considering their Pre-ETS needs and including Pre-ETS on their employment plan. Also, which we're going to review in the next module, you need to be thinking about your time for time entry and expense report purposes to ensure that you're properly charging time to the Pre-ETS budget. So let's shift gears and dig into each of the 5 Pre-ETS activities and understand more about what is included in each of those. As a reminder, the Pre-ETS desk aid is very helpful to remind you of what's included in all the Pre-ETS categories. So I recommend that everybody have a copy of the desk aid handy at your desk. It's linked on this slide. And when we go through all the definitions, besides the definition, I'm also going to be talking about performance measures, which are part of our new Pre-ETS framework. And I have that linked in this slide as well. I would recommend that you also have this document handy as we're going through the remainder of this presentation. This replaces what used to be called the common results from participation in the 5 pre-employment transition services. So now we have the Minnesota Pre-ETS framework. I'll talk a little bit more about the framework. It helps you as VRS staff to outline exactly what a student will be getting out of participating in Pre-ETS services. It also allows you to communicate with providers about what specific service or services you want a student to receive. It can give you possible employment plan progress measures. It can also be useful when you work with schools to decide what is already provided by the school and what gaps we would be filling. And lastly, keep in mind that since Pre-ETS are provided based on need, there is not any requirement that all students receive all 5 Pre-ETS, nor that they achieve all the progress measures that are outlined in the framework. So the framework is just meant to be a guide and helpful to you and schools and our providers in providing Pre-ETS. If a student is in a work-based learning program, in other words, they have a work coordinator working with them at the school, the framework also allows you to see how Pre-ETS align with that work-based learning programming. The Minnesota Department of Education has created a framework for the school work-based learning classes, and our Pre-ETS framework was developed at the same time so that we could align language and expectations as much as possible. So I think that's pretty cool. You'll see on the VRS framework that there's a code next to each performance measure. That code tells you where on the MDE work-based learning framework that same or similar item can be found. There is a link to the work-based learning page on the MDE website on this slide. As of today, unfortunately, that framework was not yet posted to the site, but it's supposed to be very soon. If you can't find it and you want a copy of it, just email me and I'll be sure you can get a copy of that. So the same is true on the work-based learning framework when it comes to the codes. So next to each performance measure on the MDE framework, there's the Pre-ETS code that aligns with each performance measure. So again, it just really helps you to see how, when a student's in a work-based learning program, how they can and often should be receiving Pre-ETS already. And also coming this fall of 2021, there's going to be a transition framework which embeds the work-based learning framework and the Pre-ETS framework into it. So more to come on that. I think it's really going to help schools, VRS, our community partners all come together to make sure that transition services broadly address all the important things like Pre-ETS and how we can all come together to make sure that those things happen. All right, so let's talk about the 5 required pre-employment transition services. This is the same definition we've had from day one with Pre-ETS services. So number 1 is job exploration counseling, which is intended to foster motivation, consideration of opportunities, and informed decision-making. It can include exploring any of these items on the list, so a student's interests, the labor market, and all types of career pathways that line up with their interests. Job exploration counseling has a code of JEC on the Pre-ETS and the work-based learning frameworks, and there are 14 possible JEC performance measures. So now on to number 2, work-based learning. Work-based learning is an educational approach or instructional methodology that uses the workplace or real work to provide students with the knowledge and skills that will help them connect school experiences to real-life work activities and future career opportunities. So work-based learning is to help a student obtain knowledge and skills within the workplace. Work-based learning can include opportunities in school, after school, or outside of the school setting. Keep in mind that we want students to have experiences in an integrated environment to the maximum extent possible, and that all opportunities for work-based learning in integrated settings are exhausted before students are placed in a non-integrated setting. Furthermore, it's essential that there's direct employer or community involvement with all work-based learning opportunities. Work experience is key. It is one of the most important predictors of success after high school for students with disabilities, especially when it's paid work. So we want to make sure that students with disabilities have paid work while they're in high school as much as possible. Here are all the types of work-based learning that are included within this pre-ETS category. So there's a lot of different opportunities that can be available either in school or from VRS or a combination of the two. If students are paid in their work-based learning experience, they need to be paid at competitive wages to the same extent that competitive wages are paid to other students without disabilities and similar experiences. Also, although this doesn't happen often, sometimes there can be a training stipend, and we're only able to provide a stipend as long as those types of stipends are available to students without disabilities as well. And when it comes to unpaid work experiences, there are very strict labor laws related to unpaid work experiences. Number one, if the student's working in a private business, they need to be paid. If it's in a nonprofit, there could be more opportunities for work experience. So bottom line is we ask that you consult with your supervisor before supporting any unpaid work experience so that we're sure that we're following labor laws, and then document that consultation in your case notes. Work-based learning has the code of WBLE in the Pre-ETS framework. There are 62 performance measures for WBLE. The third required pre-ETS service is officially titled Counseling on Opportunities for Enrollment in Comprehensive Transition or Post-Secondary Educational Programs, which is a mouthful, so that's why we shortened it to Post-Secondary Education Counseling. You may be asking what a Comprehensive Transition Program is, or CTP. This is defined by the U.S. Department of Education as a degree, certificate, or non-degree program for students with intellectual disabilities that is offered by a college or career school. They are only officially considered a CTP if they are approved by the U.S. Department of Education, and by being approved, students can also apply for federal financial aid. So examples are actually the only programs right now as of February 2021 in Minnesota are Bethel University in St. Paul and the occupational skills programs offered at Central Lakes College in Brainerd and Ridgewater Colleges in, in Wilmer. So even if a comprehensive transition program, this is the only exception to the rule, even if they don't yield a recognized education credential, a student can still receive pre-ETS while they're in those programs. So if a student is in Bethel Build they're in the occupational skills programs in Brainerd or Wilmer, they can still receive Pre-ETS while they're attending that program. So the definition of post-secondary education counseling is quite long, but think of it in two sections. The first section is about assisting students with enrolling in a post-secondary education or training program. So everything listed here relates to helping them get enrolled in the program. So understand how to successfully transition to a post-secondary education or training program, identify their options, understand how their career goals line up with those options, complete all the steps for enrolling, learn about and applying for financial aid. So that can be the FAFSA, that also could be loans, it could be scholarships and things like that. And also to learn about supports and assistive technology that might be available to them while they're in post-secondary education or training. So part 2 of the definition is to help students with remaining enrolled in post-secondary education. So it's very limited. It's about learning about what course offerings or career options are available related to the program they're going into, what kind of training is needed to succeed in the workplace, and also to look at how their opportunities and their pathways would pertain to ensuring that they're on the right pathway. And it can be about decisions about changing majors or education or training programs. So Pre-ETS post-secondary education programming is unfortunately not about providing extra supports to students to be successful in post-secondary education programs. Some of our community rehabilitation programs offer what they would call post-secondary navigation services, and that is not considered a Pre-ETS service. So some examples of what's provided through that service might be helping a student keep track of their calendar, understand their syllabus or syllabi, navigating projects, meeting with the Disability Services Office after that initial introduction to those services. All of that is not considered Pre-ETS. And if a student is potentially eligible and they need those services, they can always apply to our intensive VR program in order to receive those services. So PEC is the code on the Pre-ETS framework for post-secondary education counseling, and there are 22 performance measures in that category. Number 4 is workplace readiness training. Workplace readiness skills are a set of skills and behaviors that are necessary for most jobs. They're sometimes called soft skills, employability skills, or job readiness skills. Workplace readiness training can be offered on an individual basis or in groups. And the programming assists students with disabilities to develop social skills and independent living skills necessary to prepare for eventual employment. The workplace readiness training can teach any of these items on this list. And we also need to remember that the term readiness means that we're helping students to build skills, but we're not expecting them to be ready before we help them with getting a job, because employment first assumes that everyone is ready to work. So in this context, we're really just helping students build more skills to be more successful. So WRT is the code on the Pre-ETS framework, and there are 99 performance measures in workplace readiness training, because there's so many different things that an individual could work on related to soft skills and everything else related to this category. Number 5 is instruction in self-advocacy. Self-advocacy, I went a little too fast here, sorry. When we talk about self-advocacy, it's the ability to effectively communicate, convey, negotiate, or assert interests and or desires, and to learn about self-determination. And self-determination is taking the responsibility for communicating your needs and desires in a straightforward manner to others. So instruction in self-advocacy is learning about your disability and how it impacts you, learning about accommodations, services, and supports, and learning about personal rights and responsibilities. It's also about participating in mentoring or youth leadership activities. Here are the 4 types of mentoring that a student can receive within instruction in self-advocacy. And those 4 types are all defined here. So it's peer mentoring, disability mentoring, group mentoring, or e-mentoring. ISA is the code for instruction in self-advocacy on the Pre-ETS framework, and there are 12 performance measures on there. All right, let's review the 3 other Pre-ETS categories, which are coordination, authorized, and services in support of Pre-ETS. So here's a visual which reviews the 4 broad categories of Pre-ETS. So Pre-ETS required services, which are the 5 required services we just reviewed. Then Pre-ETS coordination are 4 specific activities, which we'll talk about in a moment. Pre-ETS authorized services, we have a document that we ask that you review when charging time to Pre-ETS authorized services, so we'll talk about that. And then finally, services in support of Pre-ETS. So Pre-ETS coordination services are these 4 specific activities. So the term coordination is very broad, but when called out in WIOA, Pre-ETS coordination services are just these things. Number 1, attending an IEP meeting for students with disabilities when you're invited. Number 2, working with our career force centers and employers to develop work opportunities. Number 3, working with school staff to coordinate and ensure the provision of Pre-ETS. And number 4, when invited, attending any person-centered planning meeting for a student who has a Medicaid waiver. And this slide recognizes that those 4 coordination services can be categorized into more broad activities that are for any student. So working with schools to coordinate Pre-ETS and developing work opportunities, those are broad, they're not individual student specific. And then the individualized services are attending an IEP meeting for a specific student or attending a person-centered planning meeting for a specific student. Just another way to wrap your head around those services. All right, so Pre-ETS authorized services. I get questions about why we call this out separately. So keep in mind that WIOA says if we have funds remaining each year after we've provided Pre-ETS required services as well as those coordination services, then we're able to spend funds on these Pre-ETS authorized services. So in the future, if we're spending all our money on required services, we might have to stop providing authorized services for a particular year. We're not in that position at this time. So again, because we want to spend as much money as we can to get to our 15%, we're authorized to provide some of these services as well. So there's 9 services that are called out in WIOA, but rather than listing those because they're kind of vague, we created this document called Staff Time and Expense Charging Items Towards Pre-ETS Authorized Services. And so I recommend that you look at that document. And actually what I'll do is I can't show it right now because I just realized, when you share on Zoom and you open up another document, it's not going to show that other document. So I apologize for that, but I recommend that you read through it because it lists all different things that you can charge your time to. It includes certain training that is approved by our VRS Learning and Development team, and they approve that training only when the training is focused on serving students with disabilities. So you will see a symbol. It will either say 50% or 100%. And the symbol's on the bottom of the slide here. It's 50% when the training isn't exclusively related to students with disabilities. It's 100% when the training is exclusively related to students with disabilities. So I know, again, the term authorized services can be confusing. It does not relate to service authorizations that we put in place to provide services with our community partners. And it's a term that's NWIOA. So to summarize, Pre-ETS required, states are required to provide those services. Pre-ETS authorized, we're able to provide those services only under certain conditions, which is basically that we haven't spent all of our funds for that fiscal year. All right, services in support of Pre-ETS. These were announced early in 2020. They were announced as Pre-ETS flexibility, so it gave us more opportunities to spend our Pre-ETS funds. Keep in mind that services in support of Pre-ETS are only available to students who are eligible for our VR intensive services. So unfortunately, students who are potentially eligible cannot receive these. And they're intended to provide extra supports to help a student access Pre-ETS. And also that you must have all of these services in support of Pre-ETS on the employment plan in order to be able to provide them. So here is the full list of what can be included as a service in support of Pre-ETS. Counseling and guidance, referral services, which is basically intake fees, maintenance services, so say clothing, uniforms, boots, things like that, transportation services, personal assistance services, which is often like in the form of a PTA, work-based learning coaching, that's a big one to support a student on the job in a work experience situation, and then books, supplies, tools, and equipment. Now, the thing to always keep in mind that these services can be paid with Pre-ETS funds only if it's necessary for accessing Pre-ETS. So when it says books and supplies, it's not related to books and supplies for a post-secondary program, because those books and supplies are about that training. When we say books and supplies, and tools and equipment, it's to support a Pre-ETS service. So really, the flexibilities are all about which budget you're using when you're funding a service. So you're able to provide the services. It's just a matter of thinking about, okay, is this service in support of Pre-ETS? And then if so, you'll want to use this budget. Excuse me, we have one last quiz before we're done with this module. There are 10 questions in the next 2 slides. So take a moment to get out a piece of paper, pause this recording, answer the 10 questions, and then push play and we'll review the answers. All right. Let's start with number 1. Name the 3 parts to the definition of student with a disability. The 3 parts are disability, age, and education program. Number 2, Pre-ETS can be provided from age 14, not grade 9, 14, through age 21 if all other elements of the definition are met. And remember, students, when they turn 22 during an academic year, the cool thing is that they can continue to receive services, Pre-ETS services, through that academic year. Number 3, true or false. Job exploration counseling can involve learning about jobs in demand. That is true. Number 4, work-based learning experiences may include in-school or after-school opportunities. Number 5, true or false. Students with disabilities in a work-based learning experience can be paid less than students without disabilities working in a similar experience. The answer here is false, of course. Number 6, workplace readiness training assists students with disabilities in developing social and independent living skills. Number 7, which Pre-ETS required service does career-related competitions fit under? And the answer here is work-based learning experiences. Number 8, true or false, Pre-ETS coordination services are not accounted for in staff time or the Pre-ETS PETS budget, and that is false. Coordination services are now within that PETS budget, and you definitely want to be accounting your time in that budget when you are providing or working on those Pre-ETS coordination services. Number 9, true or false, the only activity within Pre-ETS authorized services is training that is approved by VRS Learning and Development. False is the answer on that one, and again, you'll want to review the staff time expense charging items towards Pre-ETS authorized services to see the full list of things that you can be charging your time to under Pre-ETS authorized services. And last, true or false, potentially eligible students can receive services in support of Pre-ETS. And sadly, the answer on that one is false. Only students who are eligible for our intensive VR program can receive services in support of Pre-ETS. That is the end of this training module. Please consult your RAM, or you can certainly contact me if you have any questions. Thank you.